Welcome to the Sacred Reclamation Podcast. Here we will be exploring how we can reclaim the sacredness of birth, life, death, and all the happenings in between. My name is Sydney Sands, and my intention with this podcast is to reclaim the art of storytelling. This is a space where we will practice allowing the simple act of telling our stories and listening to the stories of others to be medicine for our bodies and spirits. I invite you to keep an open mind and an open heart as you listen to these stories. Grab a cup of tea, maybe a little snack, and settle in for story time. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Sacred Reclamation Podcast. I'm your host, Sydney Sands, and today on the show we have my sweet friend Amana. Amana and I are really still getting to know each other. We've kind of been connected through the internet world. And I attended a grief circle that she hosted a couple of years ago virtually, and then we just kind of reconnected through being in like similar online communities and started listening to each other's podcasts. And she so graciously had me on her podcast recently. And now she's on today, and I'm really, really excited to sit down with you and hear more about you and your life and your work and get to know you better. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on this end of the conversation.
Yeah, last time we talked, it felt like we could have just like kept talking forever.
Yes, totally.
All right, so I'd love to just start every episode and conversation with a little meditation. It'll just be a few minutes just to kind of drop in and get into our bodies to have a more embodied and grounded conversation, and also inviting the listeners to drop into their bodies and ground before listening to your stories. So, for you and for anyone listening, just start to notice where you're at right now without changing. Yeah, maybe you naturally just sigh or deepen your breath and just roll with that. I love Amana is moving her neck around a little bit, looking around her space. I'll invite you to deepen your breath, taking a full belly inhale, emptying everything out, maybe blowing out through the mouth. And if you feel safe and comfortable making your way to closing down your eyes, and turning your awareness and attention internally, whatever that means for you. And we're just going to drop right into our heart space. I've heard Amana say before, my name is Amana and my mantra is Be Love. So it's only fitting to drop into this symbol of love that lives in the center of our bodies. Maybe you bring your hand to your heart and just breathe in here, exploring what that space has to offer you in this moment. I love to visualize moving around my heart space, breathing into the front of my heart space, inside of my body, and maybe even expanding that to outside of your body, playing around with that. And then moving over to the left, Breathing in, moving over to the back of your heart space. Moving with your breath to the right side of your heart. Maybe journeying down into the deepest depth of your heart space. Really getting curious for a moment about all the little nooks and crannies that live here. As you inhale, moving up into the middle of your heart space. And with your next inhale, the top. And keeping with your breath, maybe there is somewhere that's calling you back to spend a little bit more time, energy, love, space there. And I wonder what your heart space looks like to you, what it feels like to you. Does it feel small and contained? Maybe it feels like this infinite space where there's so much to explore and you need to come back to this later. Or somewhere in between, keeping with your breath, inviting in an energy of love and flow, fluidity, rhythm. Our hearts are really like the mother of our bodies. They're pumping in and pumping out this beautiful life force, keeping everyone and everything that lives inside our bodies moving and doing what they're supposed to do, sending out love and receiving that love back. It's this endless, beautiful cycle of love and life force. We'll breathe here for how much love can you breathe in? How much love can you breathe out? Maybe changing the frequency or the energy around where you are physically with your breath and this love. And when you're ready, take your time arriving back, opening your eyes, noticing if there's any shift, and maybe there's not. That's okay too. All right. Got love in the room now. Well, it was already here, but even more so.
Expanded love here now.
Yeah, feels good.
Mhm.
So, what I love to do next is for both of us to set an intention for the conversation. It's so clear to me that like the intention for me is just to be in love and be in presence, loving presence with you in this moment and sending out little tendrils of love through this podcast recording to whoever's listening.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I feel that. And when you sort of asked the question there, it made me sort of visualize love like interwoven into the realms of birth and death, and that love is in those spaces and accessible within the emotions of grief and the depths of birth and all that birth can encompass as well.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so I will hand it over to you to introduce yourself. If you just want to tell us just a brief introduction of who you are, maybe where in the world you are, if you want to say where you grew up or anything.
Yeah, so this is always such an interesting question, and the way that I answer it is ever evolving. My name is Amana, and I have gathered 42 years here on this earth at this time. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, mostly in Washington State, and that's where I'm residing at this time. I am a mother of two Earthside babes and others, four others that are in spirit. And I have loved and adored women and babies since I was young, and have always like naturally gravitated towards caretaking and took care of babies that were not much younger than me as I was growing up. And I have continued on that path that has called me forth towards supporting women and their babies in birth and in death. Um, I love syncing my life with the cycles of our moon and the way that the moon connects us worldwide, that we all gaze upon this same moon that is there circling this earth. Um, yeah, I have a degree in sociology. I've been in birth work for over 15 years, been attending births. I love being outside in nature. I love gathering with other women and find it so deeply important for there to be women only spaces in this world. And that's something that I also am devoted to creating and continuing to create those spaces.
Beautiful. I love that you use the word gather twice. That's like a really special word to me, and I love the way that you used it in saying that you've gathered 42 years. That's a really beautiful way to speak about age, and I know we talked about age and aging and all of that a little bit when I came on your show. But yeah, there's something about the word gather that's like a calling that I have or a message that I receive often is to keep gathering. And like you said, gathering women and having women's only spaces, I think that that is way more important than we think it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, they've changed my life in so many ways. And I I'm super grateful that I was welcomed into women's only spaces and introduced to them in my 20s. And now here in my 40s, I host them both online and in person. and to the cycles of the moon, the way that our ancestors were synced to the cycles of the moon. So, yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Definitely want to talk about, I know you have this deep and reverent relationship with the moon, so I hope that that comes through in this conversation. I'd love to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd love to start with, it's really a broad question, but just asking, like, what do we need to know about you and your life before we kind of jump to where you are now and jump into your reclamation story? Are there any stories or really important moments or messages that you've experienced that you feel like kind of paint a picture for your becoming of who you are now?
Mm. What a lovely and thoughtful question. So what comes to mind as you talk about this, it sort of brings me back to my like younger versions of self and where I was then, and even sort of brought me back into my mother's womb, in that I was conceived when my mother was on hormonal birth control unintentionally. And she had given birth to two sons that were like, I guess they were 4 and 5 when I was born. But so she was one of four, and she had three brothers. And she'd had two sons, and then she unexpectedly was pregnant with me. And I guess my dad at the time didn't want, they had only planned for the two kids. So I had this womb experience of this turmoil in their relationship, and my dad not wanting my life to continue, and my mom choosing that my life would continue. And then when she gave birth to me, I guess she was sort of she describes that she was distraught because she didn't know what she was going to do with the girl. And I would also say that I was, during my birth process, drugged up because she had an epidural. So I went through that really important passage of being born from her with these pharmaceuticals in my body. And as a child, I really was quite shy, and that continued into my young adult years, where I was quite afraid to speak and to be heard and to have an opinion. Like people would ask me like what I wanted to, well, I always knew I wanted to be a mom, but like something simple like, what do you want to eat? Or do you want to go to this place or that place? And I would just say, I don't know. And I would follow what other people wanted and just go along with their desires. And people, when I was younger, because I was so shy, so painfully shy, I was too afraid to talk, that I came off to some people, they thought that I was being like really rude or something. And then as they got to know me, they'd be like, oh, I so understand you now, but I thought you were like this total bitch before, but really you're this like kind-hearted person that's just was too afraid to talk. And so, but then, in my 30s, I started really working on my throat chakra and just all my chakras of healing, and started sharing more expressively with my voice. And that has been a really big part of my like reclamation and becoming of that confidence to speak and be heard, and that what I have to say is valuable. And I would say that that then like led into my work of being and supporting other women and knowing my worth there, and that the experiences and wisdom that I hold from my own experience with birth and death are important, and also from witnessing and being with so many other women on their journey from maiden to mother each time. And for me, like you said, my podcast was also part of that, to practice using my voice, and then also to, oh my gosh, gasp, like share it with the world. Like that was a
Mhm.
whole another big step for me. And I actually, when I started my podcast, I had left social media. So that felt maybe a safer way to like start my podcast because not as many people were going to hear it. And then being called by spirit, by guides to like, yeah, but like we want you to show up and we want you to be heard. And like you have to show up and be out there in order for people to hear you and know you. And the journey, I've had this journey of feeling like, oh, I'm not ready yet, or no, are you sure? Are you sure there's not someone else that's gonna like speak these things that you want me to? And then eventually softening and accepting and claiming that spirit is calling me to share and to be heard and to be seen. And so now I sit here at 42 and I have so much compassion for those younger versions of myself and can really see that they were important each step of the way, and to continue to I just continue to do that next small step, even with fear, you know, afraid to do this, afraid to do that, afraid to get back on social media. And at the same time, like I also knew that I wouldn't move forward or get where I wanted to be or where I felt I'm being called, like my soul's calling to move forward, if I wasn't willing to take even those little steps forward.
Yeah, I feel like there's so much wisdom in so much of what you just shared. A couple of thoughts I had while you were speaking. The first little thread I would want to pull on is I just wonder if how you were sharing that, you came into this world drugged and then you were very kind of like shy as a child, and I have the same experience, and I just wonder if it's almost like that dulling down of us as we're entering the world and coming into the world kind of hazed and sleepy and like, and then also into straight chaos, if there's any sort of connection to how we express and how our personality kind of shows up
Mm-hmm.
in our childhood.
Yeah, I definitely feel like womb time, like that, it changes us, it alters us, right? And maybe certain people are more affected by it than others, but I definitely feel like reflectively, I didn't know it at the time. And I didn't learn about all of these things about myself in my womb time and how important that was, and the birth and not being wanted, and like that feeling, not being like, am I not good enough that you don't want me here? Am I not supposed to be here? So yes, I absolutely feel like those things have influence on us, and that it can be really important and impactful to return to like our birth story and actually know what it is. So many people don't actually know their own birth story. They've never asked and don't know what the stories were in their mother's life at that time when they were, you know, in the womb and in that early mothering, those first months of life. And sometimes knowing those can help us to like process, or for me, I'll speak for myself, like knowing that helped me to then be able to like process and unpack and, like you're saying, like shed and brighten, you know, into my most like more authentic, full, embodied being that I don't feel like I was when I was younger.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I know it's interesting, and we both think it's so interesting and fascinating, but the way that babies are brought into this world, and I'm almost envisioning like this as they move through the vaginal canal, and even in pregnancy in this modern world of like what's been normalized is like we're already putting these like layers on top of these just like pure souls, pure energy that's in there. And then as they're like moving through the vagina, they almost like get this like layer of like pantyhose or something on top of them. It's like not theirs. And
Mm-hmm.
then that's just like what you're born into. And have you ever explored your womb time memories or your birth memories or even baby memories through meditation or your dream world?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that was definitely part of my process of like, yeah, flowing back into that space so that I could, integrate in a more full way those experiences and shed what wasn't truly mine. Like you're saying, that like remove the pantyhose,
Yeah.
remove that sheath that is not mine. And so that I could be more me. Hmm.
I find that um even talking to women and asking them their birth story sometimes, like from talking to Shane's mom, the way that she'll tell Shane's birth story, it's almost like even when you ask a woman that, they're we've really lost that practice and that ritual of ceremonial birth, that it kind of becomes this like stripped away version of like Shane was induced and he was like scheduled around his dad's work schedule to be born so that his dad would be in town and able to go. And
Yeah.
so like that's like pretty much the birth story that his mom tells. And to me, hearing that, I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, but I also think that it's really beautiful to kind of reconnect. Like when you ask certain questions, I find that like sometimes getting more of a story or understanding is just about the questions that we ask, or there can be so much liberation in asking a specific question and maybe not asking another question. But I think that that's definitely a way to reclaim storytelling and these stories around birth is simply by asking questions of like, yeah, but what was your life like? How did you feel that day? How did you feel during your pregnancy? Like what was going on in your life is so interesting.
Yeah, I really encourage women, if you haven't gotten curious about your own birth from your mom, and your mom's alive and you can ask her, like ask her now. Don't wait, because this is will change your life if you choose to dive into this realm of the ways you were born and the stories that were, like you're saying, like put on us, and we can choose whether or not those we want to keep claiming those stories as ours or release them.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is wild that I mean stories that go untold kind of die with
Hmm.
that person when they die. In a
Hmm.
way, I don't believe that because I think we can access those memories, but it's much more accessible to just ask your mom and she's alive.
Yes. And yeah, the due dates, I remember asking my mom about my, like, because of course I love birth. So asking about other birth stories, asking about my brothers, and she chose not to have epidurals with them. And then it wasn't until like not even that many years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I started asking more questions about my brother because he was born the day after Christmas. And I was like, so, but like, when was his due date? Like, did you go into labor naturally? And it turned out that the like OBGYN was going on vacation. And so they like gave her these two times when she could be induced. And my brother obviously like hates his birthday being the day after Christmas.
Yeah.
And yet she chose to be induced then. And if she hadn't, he probably would have been born days or even weeks later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that is such a big rabbit hole.
Yes. Mhm.
What are you reclaiming in this lifetime? Like, what song are you singing? What message kind of shines through really brightly and clear through you?
Love. I mean, for me, it's love. And that has, as I look back, it was interwoven, throughout my childhood and things, but I really started to claim it when Be Love became my mantra maybe 15-ish years ago. And I started meditating with that. And like when you did the meditation earlier, my body's like, oh yeah, it just like immediately goes into this like almost trance-like state that I just go into so easily now because I've been there so many times. And I feel like really that I'm here to be love in an expansive way that like, I mean, I see it as like my love is going, acres away from me right now in this big sphere. It's not just for me, it's for all the people in the land and the earth and the animals, and bringing love into dark spaces like grief and death, and knowing that love can also does live in those spaces, and that we can bring that it's important to be able to go into the depths and cry and wail and all of those things. And I also have felt and experienced the importance of bringing like love and levity into grief and death as well. And just showing people in my life love. That doesn't even necessarily mean that I have to love them, but I can still show them love, and I can still embody love and be love in a way that is shared with the people around me.
If you had to define the word love, how would you define it?
Defining love. Oh, it's so hard because it's like something that you just like. I remember I asked you to define soul, and it's like, yeah, and then how do you define soul? And for me, it's like it's this palpable, felt sense, energy that is free of like hate, it's the love. How do you define love? This is such a hard question, but I should have a good answer for this, but
It's
um
hard.
it's hard. Love is, to me, it feels like compassion, it feels like safety, it feels like the warmth the of my mother's womb. It feels like the warmth of the cosmic womb. It feels like this holding, almost like an energetic, like loving embrace from spirit. And that it's that spirit shares it with us no matter what. Like it is accessible and there. It's this energy that is omnipresent and available to us to tap into whenever we need that feeling of acceptance and holding. And I mean, define love with love, but yeah, when we need that energy of, yeah, compassion, accepting, embrace.
Yeah, I think that that is a almost impossible to define the word love. I almost think, or I feel like right now I believe that love is another word for God. Like love is when you say love and be love and thinking about what is love. A little theme I've been sitting with lately is just like remember who you are, remembering who we are. And I think that we are all love at our very essence when you kind of strip everything away. And I think it really connects to the word soul as well. Like
Mm.
I think it could almost be used interchangeably, soul and love. And I used to not understand when people would say that, like, we're all love. Like, love is the only thing that's real. Like, and I used to not get it. And maybe it's one of those things where you just don't get it until you get it.
Yeah, yeah, I love that we are all love. I feel that as well. Mhm. We
Yeah,
come
like
from love, we return to love. Sort of
yeah.
like a, spirit. Like it feels like this, yeah, omnipresent energy that we are, and we're like a part of the greater cosmic
Yes.
love as well.
Yeah. Okay, so we're on the same vibe.
Thank you for that challenging question. I'm gonna have to, yeah, think about how I might be able to articulate that better the next time I'm asked.
Yeah, the question you asked me about soul, I feel like my answer has evolved so much in the few weeks since we last talked. Like, um, I think I think I said in the podcast that it was, or no, maybe I just had been hearing lately that like soul and spirit are different. And I
Mm-hmm.
think I was like, I felt very sure of it that day that you asked me that those two were different. And now I'm back in the unknown. I'm like, I don't know if they're different. And yeah, that book, I don't know if you have gotten into it. It was Life After Death by Dolores Cannon. I'm still listening to it, but that book has like been moving so much energy and questions and wisdom through my body and gotten me so curious about just thinking about life and death and our souls and love. And even the one thing I love about that book is like they're exploring a lot about how what if what everyone believed was true? Like, what if what you believe happens after you die is what happens after you die because that's what you believe? And then
Mm-hmm.
that's true for everyone. Like, there doesn't have to be this one, there's not one truth. And that is such that's been such an expansive um thought and thing to sit with for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd be curious of like what you'd have to say on that
About which part?
about any of it. I know that was a lot to spew at you, but just I guess this I guess the notion that yeah, there's not one truth and what if like what everyone believes, there's space for all of it and especially more centered towards what happens when we're not here in these bodies, either before we come into these bodies or once we leave them.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a clear enough question?
I think so. Yeah. I'm not sure how I feel or if I would agree at this moment with that, everyone can have their own truth and that they might all be true and death might culminate in different experiences for everyone based on what they believe. But I'm curious to ponder that idea now. Um, I have mostly felt like I feel like birth and death are these unifying experiences that we have as humans. And to me, it feels from my experience thus far that we all come from the same energy space, no matter what religion we are or what our beliefs are, and that we all, in a sense, return to that same energy.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the idea that they're bringing in the book is like in the beginning moments after you die. Like if someone believes that you die and Jesus is there waiting for
Yes.
you to be welcome you into the kingdom of heaven, or if you had this idea of like once I die I'll be with my mom and my grandparents and like then those are the people that are there to greet you and that like that it can that moment, which is such a fascinating thing to even ponder because we can never really be sure of what happens.
What
It's
happens?
yeah, it's fascinating and it's almost silly to even try to like spend so much time and energy like what does happen after, but I also think there's something very like innately human um and very valuable in pondering death because it's something that we're all going to experience, like no
Mhm.
matter what.
Yeah.
And, our culture has so much fear around death. So I'd love to kind of just segue into your experiences with death, if there's any stories that are rising up in you, or I know that you've done grief work and some death doula work, if I'm correct on that, and I would love to talk to you about that.
Yeah. So you just saying how, yeah, we're in a culture where people don't really want to like think about death. And it's true. I feel like there's a lot of fear around death to the point where people just don't even want to like consider it, think about it, talk about the possibilities, or even acknowledge that they're going to die someday. And some people right now with the realm of technology and what is being tried scientifically, some people are like, oh, well, by the time I die, my brain is going to be like uploaded somewhere and then I'm going to live forever in some sort of a way. And I'm just like, don't do that to me. I mean, if you want to do that, that's fine. But for me, or even, and it just reminded me of just the other day, I was sitting on the porch with my mother-in-law, and she is in her 70s, and she was just feeling like she's coming to this realization that she might not see my children, her grandchildren, like grow into adulthood. And that she's just now sort of recognizing and reckoning with that. And to me, I'm like, wouldn't that have all, like, I even think about that, like that I might not get to see my kids grow old,
Mm.
that, but I think that's more because I work in the realm of death and I have had so much experience within it. I have already had those ponderings and thoughts and reckonings with, yes, I envision myself as this, grandmother and great grandmother one day with gray hair and the families around. And yet I also know that death could come sooner, that I've been seeing people post about like midlife this or midlife that. And I'm like, you don't know what your midlife is. Like nobody
Yeah.
does. For, a 7-year-old that dies, their midlife was when they were like 3. So there's this belief or perception that that like a lifetime is only when you're like old, that a lifetime can't be when you're younger, or that a life isn't full when people are dying, when they're children or in their 20s or whatnot, that they haven't lived a full life. But I argue that, whenever we die, we have lived our full expression of that specific life. And it's obviously not comfortable often to the people around us, and people make statements like, that person got gypped, or, they didn't get to live this or that, but we're making this judgment based on just like this, like our own perspective and what we have been told is a complete life.
I have two questions. One is, and I know it's a big question. Sorry for all the big questions, but how do you think that we got here, or why do you think that that is our reaction to just be so taken aback and feel like something was taken from us or done wrongly when someone dies, like quote unquote, too soon?
My feeling and sense is that it's something that's, happened culturally over time, this new expectation that we're going to live into our 90s because we live in this modern time, and because there's medical procedures or medications or treatments that can be done to prolong life. And sometimes those things work in a really beautiful, or can work in a way that extends someone's life for years. And it's a good quality of life. And there's also times where people have more time, but they're not really like living in the same way. I've seen people be alive, but not really be present sometimes. And I think it comes from, like you're speaking about, fear about death and fear of grief. And because we have lost our culture of grieving and knowing how to be with grief and be with death, and like these things have also, you know, death and birth used to happen inside our homes and within our communities, and now, you know, 98% of birth is happening in hospitals, and 90% of deaths are occurring in hospitals. You know, people aren't bringing their loved ones home and caring for them. We've lost these like basic skills that are really human skills, to know how to be with someone as they're dying, and also to tend to ourselves and the people around us in grief. And, you know, for me, I was one of those people in my, so I was, when I was 25, my first love, his name is Bjorn, and he had cancer, and he died when he was 26. And that felt like, you know, in some ways that I was being like robbed of this like expectation, my own expectation of how long I thought our lives would be together and that he would be alive. And it really showed me firsthand in that experience, to like witness those last breaths. That was a huge experience for me, and an initiation into death, to witness the way we take our breath so for granted. And yet, like, when breath stops, life stops. And that his soul left his body. And I also am now feeling like, as I'm talking about this, we have also lost, so many of us, the practice of communing with our ancestors and loved ones that are in spirit, which I think has created a greater fear and anxiety and like this culture of hiding death more. And I didn't know the word mediumship, or how, like, the language used about how we communicate with those that are no longer in this earthly realm. But I started experiencing those things after he died, and like could like feel him and hear him and receive messages from him in all sorts of ways that I didn't know were possible. And that has continues to impact me, and it did really impact me in my 20s, and it helped me to embrace this life in this like elevated, more expansive way than I would have had I not had that experience with him at that age.
Thank you for sharing that. I wonder if you could sort of walk us through a little bit, because I know you just explained that you started communing with his spirit more, and it sounds like he's been an influential guide in your life. But
Mm-hmm.
what was it about all of that that made you continue like walking down the path of being curious about death, and just like how did that kind of unfold into your whole outlook on birth and life and death now? Because I think that it would be possible that you could have had that experience and then kind of just like set it to the side and then went along with your life and just kept going with the mainstream thoughts of death and beliefs. And so I wonder, what was it that kept you walking in that direction?
I feel like at first what kept me curious and reaching and communing in these other ways was my desire for closeness and connection with him. Like, that's what really brought me into that space. And yet I didn't really know. I didn't understand it. I didn't have the language for it at the time. But I continued to experience it and reach for it and develop my own practices within it. And then I would say that just like it's like birth and death are both these like great mysteries in our life that, people want to have like even the conception journey, because I know so many people who are like try to make babies and yet conception isn't happening, even though like the egg is there and the sperm are there. And it's like this mystery of why. And then like, why does it happen at a certain time? And the mystery of death. And because I had that experience with Bjorn, it brought me to dialogue and into the conversation with other people about death and hearing about their experiences, and that expanding the possibilities of death and the mystery of it and the ability for us to continue a relationship, and the remembering that we all have ancestors that are also like omnipresent, even if we don't know their names, even if we don't know who they were, like they are here with us, whether we acknowledge their presence or not. And then in my own personal journey and story, have, always knew that I wanted to be a mom. And then when it was time for me to be open to conception and start holding life in my womb, that then the first life that I held in my womb, that it stopped. And I had an early birth at 6 weeks. And the reality of how much we don't have control over, like the illusion of control of our lives. Like so many others that I've spoken to, we just imagine that, we've been trying to prevent pregnancy for X amount of years. And now that we want a pregnancy, now it's just going to happen. And for some people, that is true. And for me, it's also been these experiences. And I feel like this is just a part of my soul's path and leading me into the deepening of these experiences with death, so that I could be more comfortable within them and then also walk with others. Because then the next pregnancy, then I had this whole other like, oh, okay, so now when I got pregnant again, I remember like speaking so specifically to this wombling and being like, please stay, please, stay, don't go, because the first one had gone. And then to find out, when I was 6 months pregnant, after she was moving inside of me, that she didn't have kidneys. And so she wouldn't be able to survive outside of my womb. And yet I was like pleading and begging her to stay. And she was staying up into that point. And I did continue pregnancy and allowed for her natural timing of birth. But I wonder sometimes, like, would that pregnancy have ended sooner if I hadn't been pleading? I don't know. Do I really have, was that really in my control in any way, shape, or form? I don't know. But life just continues to bring me into inquiry and experience with birth and death, and that experience of birthing her alive, to hold her just for moments before her soul, exited her body when breathing stopped. And to go through another like dark night of the soul, when I had envisioned after that experience with Bjorn that would be like my one, like, big death and dark night of the soul. And then everything after that would just be beautiful and easy breezy. So yeah, I'm not sure if you want me to like continue on this path or where you want to go from here.
Yeah, I would love to continue, and I'll just say that like I feel like I feel just this energy in my heart while you're speaking, and also it does feel like a little bit of like heartache or heartbreaking, and I do what I know of your story, I find it so beautiful, and I know that you've experienced so much medicine through that, and it's shaped you, and it has really like that is obviously your soul's path, and I just want to acknowledge like how heartbreaking it feels to just have the experience of wanting a baby for so long and wanting to be a mother and um you know having that pregnancy release at 6 weeks, your first one, and then I could only imagine, like you said, being like, okay, like that happened, and so now the second one is like going to be good, and just having that intention or prayer of like, please stay, and then pretty far into your pregnancy at 6 months to find out that she wasn't going to like be a living daughter, have this idea of lifetime that we expect is just, it is heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm here now, you know, it's 10 years later now. So I'm able to speak about her. Her name, we named her Hartley, in, with a different energy. Not that I might not cry when we talk about it, but also just reminding people of that as well, because I absolutely was more tender around even just saying her name, years ago.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, I feel really in the energy of Inception a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and even just yeah, it's making me think of like all the assumptions that I have of, or that just like live in me that I haven't even didn't even know that were there, of like, yeah, you, especially knowing like how my body works and when you're fertile and how everything is supposed to work, and then when it's not happening, and just like the questions that come up, like there's something really visceral about like, yeah, and it just brings me back to how it's so humbling, birth and life and death, and so tender and so resilient, but also so fragile. I feel like almost just like, man, life can just be, just when you think that you've reached your maximum, sometimes it asks more of you. And it's just like, how could I possibly? And there's no other way to make it through that besides surrendering and just like finding the medicine in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that the only path is like through, like you have to
Mm.
move through it. And I also feel called to say that there was also a period of time that, especially, like, it was like my first love died, then my first two babies died, and I was just like, am I like cursed? Is this like, am I doing something wrong? I went down this whole rabbit hole of my own self-worth, or that there was something wrong with me, or that bad things would continue to happen to me or to people that I loved. And, in those processes, I remember experiencing, it's really common for people to say, like, everything happens for a reason. And after, like, even that, the experience with Bjorn and talking to other people, that's like, I just can't comprehend how people choose to say that, or why that's become like a story that we tell people, or something that we say. And people are often saying it in a way that they, like, with the energy of comfort or something. But I just would never say that to someone in deep grief. Like, I remember meeting this mom who had her little girl. We were working together in a restaurant, and I didn't know this about her, but she'd had a daughter named India, and my grandmother's name is India. Now I feel tearful, but just like that, I would never say to her, oh, she died for like, she talked about the end of her life with her daughter, and how her daughter was like so brave and ready for it. And I just can't imagine having a child be like that. Or I can't imagine saying to her, oh, everything happens for a reason. That just feels like one of those things that I wish people would. I hope that in the future people stop saying that to people that have experienced horrific, horrible things. Yeah.
Yeah, I almost feel like it's like a defense mechanism when someone is hearing something that's like too much for them and it makes them so uncomfortable because we have like lost these conversations around these things. And I don't know, we almost like a lot of us have these walls up of like what's okay and what's not okay. And I feel like a lot of people are oriented towards happiness and like a successful life is one that's happy.
Mm-hmm.
And we have this orientation towards feeling any other emotions and then labeling those emotions as bad. So I don't know. There's like something weird that like that's just what comes up for me is like when someone is saying everything happens for a reason, it's almost a way to like shut down the conversation and just like, get away from me with your bad story, you know?
Sure. Yeah. And you just were making me think. So I used to be a registered nurse and I worked in medical oncology and also in palliative care, which is mostly end of life care and prepping and planning. And I, within that field, as well as my own life, I also noticed that a lot of people have been told the story that, good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. And it became so clear to me that like bad things happen to good people and bad people. And the same as like good things happen to good people and bad people. Like there is no this like, I'm good, so only good things are going to happen to me. That's just
Yeah.
not the reality of life that I've experienced or witnessed. And that just because there is some bad or challenging experience, if you want to even label it as bad, but like if there's that experience in our lives, it's not your fault. It's not our fault that these things occur. It's just part of the process of life. And as soon as that, spark occurred, it was always spark of life, whether the baby lives for weeks or 100 years. Like it was never meant to be forever. That life is always moving one every minute. We're that much closer to our own death, even though we don't know when it's going to occur.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been talking a lot with my niece about she's just like very smart and so she has a lot of big questions right now. And I've gotten a little bit of trouble with my sister already about things that we've talked about, but I think if she's asking the questions and she's leading the conversation, it's not helpful or supportive to just shut it down, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but we were just having this little back and forth the other day where I was trying to be like uplifting and hopeful and being like, like, you're alive, like we're living. And she's like, yeah, we're also dying. Like we're also getting closer to dying every second. I'm like, yes, but we're also living and we're in life right now and in the present. And it was kind of funny to because I so agreed with her, but I was also trying to steer her towards like life,
Right.
we're
Now going down the
alive.
rabbit hole of like, because we're dying, nothing is worth anything. Or, some people, I'm not saying that was doing this, but yeah, some people feel like because death is gonna happen, that is anything really worth living, or is it worth me doing this or that? And I
Yeah.
guess
And
to
I
each
mean,
person.
I think those are worthy questions. And I think, like, if you sit with those questions and you arrive to the other side of, like, okay, maybe this doesn't matter. Maybe I am so, so small in this huge universe. And maybe
Mhm.
my life is just a tiny blink in time. And also, I'm still going to make the most of it. Like, I think that's a really beautiful place to arrive. I think when you get stuck in the nothing matters, like, when you feel so small in all of this bigness and you stay there, I think that's when it's can be just like really shrouded in darkness. That's you have there's this choice which is almost that similar to that spark of life, is like choosing to live and be alive.
And could the opposite be true, that like everything matters, and the way that we interact with
Yeah.
the water that we drink, or our breath, or the way we get out of bed in the morning, or the tone of our voice when we say hello to somebody, or the expression of our face, or the energy that we bring, like all of those things matter.
Yeah, I think it kind of shows us how powerful we are, of like, yeah, and it doesn't matter, and also it does matter so much, and you can literally just see the difference if you want to experiment and play around with both, of like being grumpy and nihilistic and not caring about anything and just being an asshole just because it doesn't matter, and see what that experience is like, and then try waking up and being grateful and like making the most of the day and being lovely to people and experiencing that. That's your power to how you affect life and this time while you are here, even though it's fleeting. Like, we can make such an impact on ourselves and the people and land and beings around us.
Yes, absolutely.
So
Yes.
I'd love to continue on your stories. And you had a third pregnancy.
hmm Yes. So I did have a third pregnancy. So it's so interesting when I feel like when we have multiple losses or death, then people start asking, like, or I had people saying to me, like, oh, I just like couldn't do it again, or I like wouldn't be open to conception again. But I absolutely had, like, for a year, like since I was a baby, really, since I was really young, I always knew I wanted to be a mom. And I had felt this communion with my spirit babies, and I felt their presence. And I continue to make peace with the mystery of the not knowing that it might actually be my path, that I don't get to birth live babies, that I get to you know, mother on in life as they grow. And yet I also continue to hold the hope, and the yearning remained there, and the openness to conception. And we did conceive again months later after Hartley was born. And I was again, yeah, so excited. And at that point had been really more immersed in the community of grieving moms who chose different paths, sometimes after having a baby that died, and knowing that, yes, my baby Hartley, she didn't have kidneys, so she wasn't in a body that could survive. Yet I'd met plenty of moms whose baby's physical form was, like perfect, and yet they died in their mother's womb or shortly after birth. But yes, so I conceived in the springtime. And so my 40-week-ish mark was at the end of December in 2016. And I was so excited and hopeful. And I remember talking to this little wombling, and I continued to, so Hartley was born at home with a midwife present. And I chose to also birth this next baby at home. And it was also interesting. I worked in a hospital at the time as an RN, and I worked closely with physicians and different people. And they were all like so surprised that I would have a baby at home again after my experience with Hartley. But then it's so funny because Hartley wasn't going to live no matter where I was. If like I had been in a hospital, she also wouldn't have lived. And we knew she wasn't going to live when she was born. But I had always known I wanted to birth my babies at home, and it had attended lots of births with midwives at that point, because I was a birth assistant with a group practice of midwives that did home birth and birth center birth. And I had a beautiful blessing way with a community of women and continued to prepare for labor and birth at home. And I remember just like, ooh, like wondering, you know, when it would happen, and having my brothers. So his 40-week mark was the 29th. And so, but I was thinking, oh, maybe he'll be a winter solstice baby like earlier that month, because I love solstices and things like that. But then solstice came and went, and he was still, I didn't know he was a he, but he was, yeah, in my womb. And then I had an appointment with the midwife on my 40-week mark on the 29th, and that was lovely. And then I went home and snuggled with my husband, and he fell asleep before me, which is quite unusual for us. He's normally the one that's up later. And I remember, for whatever reason, I turned on the TV and I found a documentary about psychedelics and fell asleep to it. And then I woke up to sensations, and they were really mild at first, and I just went up and tried to like sleep in bed at that point. And I love the correlation now, because birth and Laborland is like also psychedelic in its own right. And I knew that labor could be long. I guess it might help to say that with Hartley's labor, it happened across 3 days. It was like 30 some hours of labor. And I had been like, it'd be nice if this one were a little bit shorter than that, this labor. And so it was in the wee hours of the morning on the 30th that I woke to these sensations, and eventually was no longer comfortable in bed. And so I went out and labored in the living room and different spaces. It was, you know, cozy. There was snow on the ground where we live here, not actively snowing, but snow on the ground and cold. And I remember starting to make some bread dough, because I thought it would be nice if I could, you know, like bake some bread and send it home with the midwives. And was enjoying flowing with the sensations of this birth. And then as it got closer to, I think it was like 6-ish a.m., I had decided that I was gonna text my man, send him a message, and just say, like, don't like wake up and stay in the bedroom like I'm in labor. So I wanted him rested, because I didn't know how long labor was going to be, and I didn't really feel like I wanted him or needed him at that moment. But I also didn't want him like lingering in the bedroom, because I had this little list of things for him to do in early labor, like scrub the toilet one more time in case I'm vomiting into it or birthing baby or placenta into it. I wanted him to like clean the floors, like these little things for him to do. But I texted him, and his phone, his ringer was on, which it normally isn't. He turns it off, and he said he like startled awake, because he knows how much I hate it when I'm like woken by his phone accidentally. But then he saw the message was from me, and he came and he like ran out and was like super excited. And he started doing the different tasks that I had on the list for him, which was great. And it felt like after he was awake, labor definitely like kicked it up a notch. Sort of before it accelerated, I wasn't fully like timing contractions or anything like that. It just felt nice to just flow and have my music. And then he asked if he could get in the shower. I'm like, oh yeah, get in the shower. No big deal. But when he was in the shower, it went to the next level. And when he got out, I was like, I'm gonna get like in the shower and see if that will help with my sensations. And while he worked on like blowing up the birth pool, but the shower did not help. It felt like it just continued on even greater, to the point where then he was like, do you want me to like call the midwife? And I was like, no, like didn't want him to call yet. And he was And then eventually I was like, I'm just gonna fill our regular bathtub, turn the shower off, I'll like use this bath. And then was wanting him close during the sensations. And then he would like go to try and work on the birth pool. And then I'd want him back. And eventually I was like, stop going back to the birth pool, just stay here with me. And of course, he did, and he was right with me. And then I started having the like pushing sensations and felt that natural urge of my body starting to push. And that's when he was like, yeah, I'm gonna call. He's like, you sure you want me? He was like, yes, yes, call the midwife now. Because I had envisioned, I had wanted her presence. And so he did call her. And while she was en route, I remember my waters breaking into the bathtub and him being like, oh, and there's a little bit of blood. And I'm like, it's okay. Like I've been to so many births. I'm like, a little blood, it's fine. It's okay. And then in that labor, like didn't really feel myself, like wasn't feeling for his head or anything. I was just sort of in it. But I could feel that I was opening and had my little mantras of like open, soft, and was repeating those things within out loud and within my own mind. And the midwife arrived eventually and set down her things, and she could look and see like the top of his little head emerging. And I had felt myself sort of like waiting for her to be there to like really allow more energy into the pushing sensations. And then I started pushing along with some of the sensations, and he was born into the bathtub 7 minutes after she arrived. And I pulled him up out of the water, and he cried right away, which I felt really grateful for. And my husband ran around like super excited and happy. And I his cord was kind of short. I also think it's so interesting. I love talking to women about their cords and like those babies and the correlation that is often found between like the length of cord and sort of how that child interacts as they're growing up, of their closeness or their independence. And his was like I couldn't even get him like to my breast because the cord was short. And he was also born with one hand over his face, over his eye. Had his little hand up there. But I birthed the placenta into the bath. And yeah, and I was just in bliss and so happy that he was alive. And I remember the birth assistant arrived then later after he was born, and at some point everyone orchestrated and helped me get to the bed. And I had already known at that point. I actually didn't really know about cord burning or the other ways that we can honor placentas, but I knew that it didn't feel right or make sense to me that the dad or somebody else would cut the cord between like my baby and their placenta that I grew inside of me all this time. So I cut the cord when I was ready, and he nursed really well from the beginning, which I was super grateful for. He didn't have a name for a few weeks, and we just got to know him. And I did experience some feelings of like hypervigilance with him and just worrying about him stopping breathing or something like that. But he didn't. And, he's 8 years old now, running around, this amazing little guy. Yeah.
Beautiful. I feel like I was like there with you in that story. What did his name end up being, if you want to share?
Yeah. So his first name is, so in those weeks when he didn't have a name, we were calling him like Little Bear.
Oh.
And and I'm Scandinavian of heritage, and he had one hand over one of his eyes when he was born. And so we decided on the name Odin, who like gave one eye for wisdom and felt connected to like my ancestry, and gave him the middle name Bear. So Odin Bear.
I love that. It's a
Yeah.
great name.
Yes. It
So,
suits him.
what is the correlation between if you have a short cord, you're more independent or more or closer to the mama?
So, and this is just my experience from
Yeah.
like talking hearsay, speaking to different women and asking them these questions. But so, like for me, he was much more wanted to be closer to me a lot more when he was younger, less independence at that age, and um like wanted to be right, like was nursing every 40 minutes and was very close to me at night and all the time, and only, and then my daughter, her cord was longer, and she sometimes didn't want to sleep on me, and she wanted to have some sleep next to me or, right near me, and was more, I don't know, yeah, just more independent, more her more separation, I felt like. Whereas with Odin, with a shorter cord, it was a little more closeness.
Okay. That's so
Yeah.
interesting. I've never heard that before, but that's cool.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so how far apart are your two children? How old is your daughter?
So yeah, Odin's 8 and Charlo is 5.
Okay.
And then so between Odin and Charlo, I did have 2 other pregnancies that ended in death or loss, however you want to say it. At another one at 6 weeks, and then one at 11 weeks.
Mm.
hmm Yeah. And then it was summer solstice again. And I felt the energy of a daughter. And I remember it was like summer solstice, and I was actually on this property where I am now, and not under the night sky, and like having this moment with the universe and being like, I'm getting older and I know that there's a daughter there, and like it's now is the time, and was just like really calling her in and asking universe, like, if it's not going to happen, I'll accept that, but like if she's coming to me, like it's now is the time. And that next cycle we conceived my daughter, who's now 5.
At any point in time when you were having the losses, and I don't know if it would have been maybe before your son, but did you ever consider like doing any interventions for pregnancy, whether that was like IVF or surrogacy or adoption? Like, did you ever go down that road, or were you always clear on that that wasn't the way for you?
Yeah, I had felt at that point in my life pretty clear that that wasn't the path for me, that I felt that it was really important that if I were going to have these babies, that they, the conception would happen within me, and that, the egg and the sperm would choose one another, that it wouldn't be a sperm being inserted into an egg by some stranger in a laboratory. That for me, that wasn't for me. And that, maybe I would choose adoption at some point if I wasn't able to have my own babies, but that I was open to continuing to try to receive them.
Okay. Just
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to hear your daughter's story if you'd like to share it.
Sure. Yeah. So then I was pregnant again and super excited. And also in that pregnancy, super, super nauseous and vomited like throughout the whole thing. Was throwing up in the stairwells at work, and if I rolled over in bed was throwing up all over the place. And to the point that even like my husband, he left me little like love notes on the back of the toilet seat so that when I was vomiting into the toilet, he got me like a little knee board so that when I was kneeling and vomiting, that
Oh,
I felt his love and support in the ways that he was able to, as he was not experiencing it himself.
that's really sweet.
Yeah. Uh, and so in Odin's pregnancy and my son, I didn't really have any of that. But in Hartley's pregnancy, I also had a very similar lots of nausea and vomiting. So it was interesting to have these pregnancies that the experience of them was very similar in those ways. And it had other people asking, like, are you sure you're not going to like make sure that this baby has kidneys? You know, like what if this baby doesn't have kidneys either? But I chose not to find out whether or not she had kidneys. I had, after birthing Odin, the concept of free birth or family birth, birthing without a medical professional, had entered my realm of possibility, and I knew that that's what I wanted for this next birth, and that's what I was going to choose. And so that's what we planned for with this birth. And I had always loved the idea of the older children being present if they wanted to. So, fairly early in pregnancy, started talking to my son about asking him whether or not he wanted to be there when this next baby was born. And he always said yes. He never said no. And so that began like the dialogue and the teaching about what that might look and sound like, and watching other videos of women birthing their babies, having, family births, and also deciding to invite my mother-in-law to be present with us in case, at 3, he might change his mind or want to go other places for times of the labor, again, not knowing how long labor would be. And so yeah, I was excited to labor in this other way and birth without some outer authority in the room. And because I'm a birth nut, like I love birth videos and stories and photos, and with my first 2 births hadn't had any of that. So I really wanted that for this last, what I perceive to probably be my last birth. And it has been my last birth. But so I invited 2 of my close friends, one to take photos and one to do video, and just continue to grow and prepare and be excited and hopeful for this baby and this birth. And my 40-week mark was in the middle of March 16th. And because Odin had been born the day after his 40-week mark, I sort of thought, this baby will probably be born sooner than that. But she stayed in. She stayed in until 41 weeks and a few days. And my mother-in-law was staying with us at that time just so she could be near. And again, I went into labor in the wee hours of the morning around 2 a.m. So my son's birth had just been around 6 hours. His labor was about 6 hours. And so I woke up around 2 in the morning to really strong sensations that were not comfortable in bed. And so I got out of bed and like labored by myself for about an hour before. In all my other births, I felt like I was able to find a rhythm and positions and ways to like be with the sensations that felt more easeful. But with hers, there was like everything that I tried was just pretty much felt the same, which was a hard feeling for me. And I remember inviting my husband then to come out and just be with me and witness me and see whether or not his presence would have make an impact on the feeling of sensations that I was having. It didn't change the sensations, but it was nice that he was there. And he asked if I wanted him to call our friends for them to come to do the photos and the video. And I said, oh yeah, thanks for remembering. Yes, please call them. So they came and just, it was lovely to have them. They entered the space beautifully. And my mother-in-law woke up just from the people being there. And I remember she kind of like sat down in the space that I was laboring. And a little bit later, I asked her to go downstairs until we called her up because I just didn't feel like I wanted more eyes on me at that time. And got in all sorts of different positions. And then I remember the pushing sensations started, and they were so strong that I put my hand over my perineum and I could feel like her head was there, but I held her head in for many, many sensations. It felt like she had such strength and force, and was like, if I had not held her there, I'm sure she would have been born sooner, but my perineum and I was not quite prepared or ready for that. And at some point we did wake up my son, and he came out and he was like super sweet and loving. And I was in labor land. So some of this I like remember from looking back at footage now, but there was like this time where he like came up and he really wanted to like, support me and like give me lovin's, and it was just so sweet because so many people were like, he's only 3, like he's gonna be crazy in your birth, but he was not at all. He was so sweet and beautiful. And then eventually at some point after holding her in, I just felt that it was time, and I was had found myself sort of reclined against my husband behind me, and our legs were sort of interlaced, and I was sort of moving my hips at times, pushing up off the ground, even though I was sort of reclined onto him. And I released my hand, and her head emerged. And then she, did her little turn. My husband's like, can I do anything? I'm like, no, we just have to, wait for her to do she did her little turn. And then in another sensation or two, she was born up to like her belly button. She flopped onto the floor, because I was sitting on the floor. She flopped with her arms up in the air. The umbilical cord was around her neck this way, like not wrapped fully around her neck, more like a sash or a scarf or something. But I felt like it was holding her in a bit. I remember asking my husband I couldn't quite, I'm trying to like reach her. I have my hand on her, but I couldn't quite pull her up. I asked my husband to help me pull her up. So he, like reached around me. And so we were both sort of holding her, and he helped to, and her little bum fell to the floor. And I remember asking him to unwrap the umbilical cord, but he was like too nervous or whatever. He was afraid to hurt something or me or her. But then I was able to, with his help of bringing her a little bit closer, I just, looped the cord over her head and pulled her up, and she started crying. And my husband said, "We have a baby." And he said, and my mother-in-law is there, and she's like saying, well done, well done. She's British, and I just love the way that she is. And my son's right there. I remember in the video, he like, like touched, and then was like, had like birth, wet birth on his hands. And he was like, but like super curious and right there. And I remember then like looking and being like, oh, you really are a girl, and holding her to my chest and just holding her up and being like, oh my gosh, like you're the one that was in me. And oh yeah, it was just so lovely, and all those hormones that flood in. And I sat there for whatever time felt good. And a little while later, I remember just feeling ready to get her placenta out. And so I wanted to birth it into this pie dish that I had. So I held her in my arms and just like kneeled over this pie dish, and her placenta came right out. And then everyone, orchestrated to help me get into bed where I wanted to go next with her. And we sat there for time and just, we're all in this beautiful little birth bubble together. My friends, my mother-in-law, my husband, our son, my son like climbing up on bed too, and just soaking her in and being in those precious moments. Those first breaths only happen once. And sometime later I had decided I wanted to do a cord burning with her this time. So it's so funny. I didn't know anyone who had done it before. I was just like Google searching, like I'd heard about it. So then I was searching how to do it. And people were saying, what I read at the time was that you had to create some sort of a shield for the baby so that they don't get like hit by the sparks or something when you're burning the cord. I would not do a shield again. I did like create this shield, but she didn't need it. And I had known that it can take some time when people are trying to just use one candle. So I had got 4 candles and asked my mother-in-law and my 2 friends to also hold candles. So the 4 of us women held the candles, and we just used a little box. They make cord burning boxes that have little like notches for the candles. I just had a regular sweet little box that someone had given me for the wax to drip in. And we sang She All Comes from the Goddess, and to her, that song. And she was laying there and just like watching and just like totally zenned out and alert. And then she was separated from her placenta, and we continued on as a family of 4.
Wow. I love both of those stories. And that one I said the first one I feel like I was there with you, and I feel like that with this one, and I've seen the clip on Instagram of that moment, so even more so I can like imagine what it must have been like, and your storytelling is so rich and that I can really like almost feel like I'm a fly on the wall, but that's such a I like that you use the term family birth because it feels exactly what that was. And the
Mm.
beautiful cord burning, you like weave so much ritual and ceremony and also like simplicity and sweetness
Mhm.
into that birth. And it just is such a beautiful way to, unless you're having more children, or are you just
No. Yeah.
a beautiful like finale of
Yes.
your journey?
Yes. Yeah.
Hmm.
And her birth was even shorter. Hers was 4 hours, around 4 hours, her labor.
Wow.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, since you have such a like wealth of wisdom around birth, is there any like one nugget of wisdom that you would give to maybe first-time mothers or women who have not experienced pregnancy or birth but want to?
Hmm. I encourage women who are, yeah, in the season of conception or that are already pregnant to get curious about birth and labor and the spectrum of what's possible. There's pretty much the only births that we see like in culture and what's considered like normal, and what a desirable birth is or what's safe is hospital birth. And just because something is common, just because 98% of people birth there, that it doesn't mean that that is the best choice for you. It might be. Like, I trust women to make the choices, but there's something about, I'll hear a woman say that, she wants a natural birth, or she wants these different elements of, ceremony or things in her birth. And then she's choosing to birth in the hospital. And it's like, she's making that choice. And I think it's important to ask ourselves, like, my choices in alignment with the birth that I desire.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, same could be said for our life. Like, you say but with birth, it's like so right there that we can't expect to have a natural undisturbed birth in a hospital. It's like going to McDonald's and asking for some filet mignon or something. It's not what they serve. I would really encourage women to listen to birth stories and watch birth videos of the types of birth that they hope to have, and speak to women that have had the types of births that they are hoping to have, because that will help to clarify what you might want and not want. And then also remembering that birth is like this, you can't choose every aspect about it. You can have this like vision of what you want, and also to think of it as like this greater, the way that you would think about like wedding, like how do you want it to look? How do you want it to smell? Like, who are the people that you feel the safest around? Like, do you want strangers in your space? If you are birthing in a hospital or wherever you're birthing, if you're having a medical attendant, is it important to you to be the first one to touch your baby when they're birthed from you, when you birth your baby? Do you want your touch to be the first touch that they receive from the outside? Obviously, your baby's touching you on the inside, like your touch is their first touch, but there is something significant about being born. And are you okay with gloved hands being the first thing that your baby encounters? Are you okay with vigorous rubbing from strangers? And just asking yourself some of these questions that you might not have thought about. And when you listen to other women's stories, it gives you the opportunity to hear also the spectrum of possibility. So I really believe that we need to tell our stories more often, that it's a really important part of preparing for birth and prepare for the labor, that you developing a practice of the way that you can be with discomfort during your pregnancy or even before is something that I think can help a lot of women in labor, because we've gotten to be such a comfortable society. We got hot water whenever we want to. We have these cozy beds and these different ways of being, and we don't have that much practice being with discomfort. And so I know that birth can be pleasurable for some women, and some women have no discomfort. But a lot of women, when they're birthing, they have some level of discomfort. And so learning how you can work with that and be with that, rather than try to numb it out with some pharmaceuticals or something like that, that I just would really encourage women to delve into that practice of being with discomfort.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. That was amazing. And I'm like listening to you talk, and I'm like, okay, I have to have her on the podcast again, because there's so much more I would want to talk to you about. And I know you have so much more wisdom to share. Like, I know we could do a full 2 hours on just talking about what you just said.
Yes.
And it's just reminding me that like there's so much work to be done in birth. And when I say work, I do mean like sharing stories and yeah, educating sisters through storytelling and like gathering women and connecting women. And I think that's really, really important for first time mothers, especially in the age of social media where we just like it's naivety and then also miseducation and then this like weird glamorized social media world we live in that I think this can distort um how our first birth might go. And I also think that that can be a big reason for transfer in a home birth is
Mhm.
just expectations versus reality.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've really been thinking about and reflecting on too is I was specifically trying to search for videos of hospital birth. And you can't find very many because they don't allow videotaping of births in the hospital. It's against their policy. It's not a law, but it's against their policy. And I believe it's because they don't want people to see the violence that happens to women and babies in birth. So like all the birth videos that we're seeing online are mostly home birth or birth center birth where the practitioners allow, or mothers are birthing without them, so they're allowed to do whatever they want to. But I was reflecting on that. I feel like that's such a disservice to women too, because if all you're seeing is the woman after the baby's born or in labor at the hospital, and you just have this vision of what the actual like birth is going to look like, but we're not able to ever really see that. Like I found like maybe one or two, and it was not pretty. It was not like one, the woman is like screaming, asking the people to like stop touching her. It's obstetrical rape and violence happening. And so women are choosing hospital birth, envisioning what it might look like, but never having the opportunity to see video footage of what a hospital birth actually looks like. And I wish that that was different, but that's really how it is now. And I'm not really sure where I'm going with that, but I just feel so sad that women choose that, feeling like it's going to be safe and lovely, and not understanding the reality of what that experience is going to feel, sound, and look like.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you making that point. And I also find I find it's kind of a difficult balance to hold of not wanting to scare a woman who's choosing hospital birth and also being able to be honest and say what you're saying doesn't sound like what happens at the hospital, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And yeah, that's something that I think I mean, it will be a lifelong journey for me, I'm sure, of learning the languaging and how to communicate with women about birth and birth choices because it's such a tender topic. And but I do think that we do need kind of that, we need just the pure honesty and saying the hard thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and women will say, but my baby's alive, and I'm alive. But that's like the bare minimum that we should be aiming for with birth. Like alive, of
Yeah.
course, we all want to live and we want our babies to live. But birth is so this magical opportunity for so much more for the woman and for the baby and for the family, that is really, from my experience, it's we've been, so many of us have been robbed of that. Women have been robbed of that with the way that people care for women when they're laboring and birthing in hospitals.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that it's just a ripple effect, and we can see the effect of that in the world and culture today.
Yeah, women having more challenges in postpartum, being anxious and depressed and things like that, that all are in the birth influences that, those days and weeks and months of mothering. And if we convince a mom that she's not capable of birth, and all that often translates to a woman feeling like incapable of mothering and breastfeeding and all these things, and also not recognizing the way that the pharmaceuticals can impact that bonding and the hormonal cascade and increase the chances of having these more challenging outcomes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll have to have you on again and we can dive into that because I would love to just do a conversation and talking about birth and all exploring options and birth outside the medical system. And I feel like you would be
Mm.
a great woman to chat with that about.
Yeah, I would love that. I've been, yeah, appreciating the questions that you've been asking and challenging me in new ways, in a good way. So thank you so much for having me, and loved having you on my podcast. I was realizing I should have like looked at what episode it was so I could say which episode it was here, but
I
yeah.
can maybe I'll record an outro and put it in, but I also want to say your podcast is The Heart of the Soul.
Yeah.
And you've been doing that for a couple years. It's a beautiful podcast, as you can imagine, if you've listened to this whole episode with Amana so far. I do want to ask, is there like anything else that is wanting to come through you before we close and before you share where people can
Hmm.
connect?
Let me feel for a moment. I feel like one thing that keeps a theme that keeps coming up with me and with women is that we're so practiced at looking outside of ourselves for answers first, to ask the doctor or Google or a friend or a book or whatever it is, whatever the entity is outside of ourselves. But I would love to encourage women to start the practice of, before looking outside of yourself, when you have one of those like inquiry moments of like, oh, I wonder how this works, or I wonder, or I'm thinking about doing something this way, or what about that? Can you take a moment, even 1 minute or 5 minutes, to like sit in the wonder and know that you have so much wisdom within you that you won't even know that it's there if you don't allow yourself the space to access and open to receiving the knowings within you. So I just would encourage women to be open to receiving those messages from within, from your intuition, from your internal compass. And it's fine to sit with those answers. And yes, after that, if you want to then ask a friend or Google or whatever and see how they align or they don't align, but just giving yourself the opportunity to deepen that connection with your own knowing and your own power will serve you in life, in birth, in mothering. So just remember to pause and ask within before looking out and asking someone else.
Hmm, thank you for that. It was
Yeah.
like gold, gold right there. My mom gifted me this necklace when I was in college, and it was a little spiral, and it said, "Everything you need is already inside of you." It was like engraved in the spiral. And
Chills,
yeah,
true bumps. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, where can people find you? Where can they connect with you? And do you have any offerings that you want to share?
Yeah, sure. So on Instagram and YouTube, you can find me at Amana Be Love, and my website is amanabelove.com. And I offer, yeah, one-to-one services with women on Instagram and YouTube. I do weekly soul messages along with the cycle of the moon. So check those out if you're into that. And then I also host 2 monthly circles online, a grief circle and like birth circle, where obviously the birth one, they're women only spaces centered around pregnancy, birth, and early mothering, and then the death one about death and grief. And they're also along with the cycles of the moon, the birth one on the full moon and the grief one on the new moon each month.
Beautiful. And I will say from my one little experience of attending your grief circle, it was a really, really sweet and tender, beautiful space. So I highly recommend anyone who feels a little inkling to join.
Thank you.
All
Mm,
right. Well, thank you so much, Amana. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And I'm sending you endless blessings and gratitude. And I'll see you on the next one.